All right, welcome everyone. I am Tom LeClaire. I am the president of the Jefferson County, New York Genealogical Society. For those that are in the room, we just had our business portion. For those that are not here tonight, we're presenting the presentation, we're taping it to make it available to everyone. So thank you for joining in online. But tonight we're going to be talking about everything's relative. And this is a program that I got from some genealogy book. They said, everything's relative. And what it really means is we're all related in one way or another. And they said, one of the things people can do is get up and talk about one of their ancestors. And there may be someone in the room will say, hey, that's an ancestor that I'm connected to as well. So here's how I'm going to read it. It says, we are all connected through a shared interest in genealogy. As we begin the new year, and this is Happy New Year for the Genealogy Society, our 33rd year. It's a new year. We start with vigor and excitement. We have invited several individuals to share an interesting ancestral story from their own personal genealogy research. Each will tell generally how they learned of the story, whether it was a family relative or how they're connected to it, whether it was through a newspaper article or some other form of research. And hopefully these inspiring stories will motivate you and all the people online to learn and share one of your stories. Speakers that we're going to have tonight will include, as a minimum, Ann Davis, Larry Corbett, Janine LeClaire, myself, Tom LeClaire, Carrie Johnson, Donna Trumbull, and Greg Plants. And we may, depending on the time, we'll have additional people from the audience come forward. And we have Patty Wagner here taping the program, so thank you, Patty. So I'm going to go ahead first, and I'm going to tell you that I got started in genealogy back in about 1982, right here in this building. All right, I came to an open house, and they had different programs, whether it was the spiritual things, or talking about just whatever, but there was this one area where there was a bunch of old photos, and I gravitated right to that table, and I go, what are we doing? And they said, have you ever heard about genealogy? And I'm not kidding you. I said, I don't know that word from Adam. And they go, well, we're going to teach you something. And I've been learning ever since. So I started building a tree, and one of the first things that I learned in the newspaper that really excited me, I'm going to share with you tonight. So my great-great-grandfather is Francis LeClaire, all right? I spelled my name L-A-C-L-A-I-R. He spelled his L-E-C-L-E-R-C, French, all right? But I didn't know much about Francis LeClaire. I didn't know much about his wife, Felicite Bassillon. But they had 8 children, 4 boys and 4 girls. And their oldest son, firstborn, he was the last to die, all right? He saw all his brothers and sisters come after him and go before him. But on his 80th birthday, thankfully for all of me and my family, a reporter interviewed him on his 80th birthday. And they said, tell us something about your family. So I'm going to read what was in the newspaper. Mr. Raphael LeClaire, he recently celebrated his 80th birthday. He's a highly respected resident of Brazier Falls, New York. He was born in the village of Hogansburg, which is in Franklin County. His parents, Francis and Felicite, were of full French blood. Raphael was just a lad in his teens, but he had been working for several years toward the support of his family. His father was drafted for the Civil War. The writing's small, so I have to keep looking down. But his father was drafted for the Civil War, and I did not know this for sure. I had found an article that said that the father was exempt because he was 35 years old and had a family. But in this article, it says that, in fact, his father was drafted. And he deemed that he was best to buy out. You had an opportunity through the government to pay $300. My great-great-grandfather's total wealth was about $200. But he borrowed $300 from his employer so he didn't have to go to Civil War. At that time, he had 7 children at home and the 8th on the way. All right? He was 37 years old. He was literally just past the draft, but for whatever reason, he was being drafted. And they made a decision, talks about they had a family discussion, and all the kids voted, Dad, we don't want you to go. We don't want you to go and never come home, so just stay right here. And he paid the $300. And in this article, Ravel tells on how not only he was the oldest, he donated all his money toward the paying of the bills. But it also talked about how the kids would earn a penny here and a penny there. And all that money for the next 5 years went toward paying off that bill. And that's a story that, to me, just sticks with me. Because not only did I learn a little bit about my great-great-grandparents, that they are full French blood. That's why I thought that I was mostly French, but really I'm mostly Irish. But that's on another line. But it is a story that sticks with me throughout all my genealogy research. So thank you for allowing me to share that. And with that, Ian, I'll invite you to come on up.
Thank you, Tom. My name is Ann Davis, and I've been a member of the society since the late 1990s. And I started like this other lady that claimed I don't have anybody in Jefferson County, so I was interested in St. Lawrence County. Well, at that time in the 1990s, the best place to get information was to come back here to the church and go to the library and order microfilms. So I did a lot of time on microfilms, and because I was here so much, Ed Schroll, he was a director at that time, he wanted volunteers, so I started volunteering to help others find their information. So that's how I got started in this society. But actually, I'd started my family tree back in the 80s too, back when my kids were small, and their grandfather come to the house, and I didn't have anything to talk to him about, so I just asked him to talk to me about his family. So by the time he passed, I ended up knowing the most about the Davis line, so that didn't help me out any. I was still looking for that Revolutionary War soldier, because that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to see if I could find a Revolutionary War soldier. So I ended up with my research going through the microfilms, and he happened to come get some information, and I copied everything that I could from St. Lawrence County and everything I could copy off of the microfilms. Now, our microfilm readers back then didn't have a printer. So you literally sat in the dark and wrote everything out by hand. Yeah. And I still have those notebooks of where I wrote everything out by hand. So that helped tremendously when it comes time that you could go to the clerk's office and get your death certificates and birth certificates and whatever. But at that time I was looking for my Revolutionary War soldier. But in the meantime, I found many others, like 40 some others to get into the DAR and some of the other societies. But so that's how I got started. But for my Revolutionary War soldier, it took me 5 years to find the information, because my first Revolutionary War soldier, I now have 6. The first one come from Rhode Island and helped settle Governor. So, and when I just happened to buy the library in Governor, I went in and it was like a gold mine of information, because another relative had done, that was a professor, had done a lot of research on the Smith family, because my dad always said, I think you should talk to Grandma Cora Smith. I thought, no, I don't think so. Yeah. I'm not going to tackle a Smith line, so I did that. But there's a lot of tricks. Right now, I do have a Revolutionary War soldier, and he is in Watertown, and I've driven by his house, or where he's buried many, many years, because he's buried in Arsenal Street Cemetery. Mm-hmm. So I will be putting up a monument for him this summer. I've already sent for a stone. There is a family lot that I happened on, and that was because I was doing the research for another person, and I come across the name Smedley, and I thought, I've seen that name before, and my sixth great grandfather or fifth great grandfather was married to a Smedley, so I thought, well, still not related to me. Well, I'm related to his second wife, so therefore then it's a Pippin now that so then I started looking, well, if he lived in the early 1800s here in Watertown, and it shows on his pension records that he died here in Watertown. So then I went to maps, and I don't have his map, but it would be like these maps that you can get, and I'm pretty sure Terry has them up at the library. You got, these are maps that's got the locations of the different towns, but it's also got the names of who owned the property. They're basically property maps. So, and that's pretty cool. So you can learn a lot from these maps because people lived in clusters. Families, they moved in groups, and lots of times they lived in clusters. And sometimes when you're looking at it, you might see that a neighbor that was on one of the census is also living right close by. Right? So they're pretty cool to have. Of course, if you're going through records of your own family, you want to look for things that look like this. These are applications. This one happens to be the daughters of 1812, and this is for Asa Pippin. So, and then in that, you're going to find records like this. Now, you think only DAR has lineage, but no, all of us do, because I'm working on another one. That's why this is all out here, is because I'm working on one for Daughters of the Colonial Wars. So I'm back in the 1500s now. So, but I know a lot about King Philip's War. I know a lot about all the wars because I've got somebody. So you don't ever give up, and don't stay with one line. Spread out, So, but you can order these. Each lineage society has their own library. Most of them, well, the ones I'm going to, I can't say most of them because I know a lady that's actually in 80 of them. So there's a lot of them, a lot of them out there. I wouldn't want to be her because there's dues for all of these. So, but you can. I'll be going to Washington, and I won't be at the meeting next month because I'm going to be there from April 4th to April 20th. So, and that's for all these lineage societies. These are their national things. But each one has a library or a place that they keep the old applications. Except for 1812, I have those applications in my storage room at home. I inherited them years ago, and I can't get anybody to take them, so they're still there. But any of them that are from 1812, I have. But they have them on microfilm now because I've sent them to Washington, and then they ended up sending them back. So lucky me. But there's a lot of tricks, and another trick I think that's interesting is when you go to a cemetery and look around, as you should, take pictures of the stones that surround your family plot, because you never know. Because my Pippin plot is probably about from here to that door, away from the big rock monument in Arsenal Street Cemetery. It's about from here to the, and I never seen it. Well, of course, if I did see it, I wouldn't have known it. So, but that's how close it is. So, there's a lot of government records that you can get to help prove the Pippin family. I had a letter written by Asa Pippin's wife, because when he died in 1848 in Clayton, I didn't know that until I got the letter, and this was a land grant, and he left 3 children underage children. So therefore, when he died, he served in the Civil War. So, the War of 1812, not the Civil War, and so he got land, and when I first seen it, it said land in I don't know, some Wisconsin. I thought, well, my family never lived in Wisconsin. Well, the land was. So you don't ever say never. Don't ever say never because it's right there. So, and that's it.
Okay,
I could go on for all night, so you know me. I thought about putting me on a timer, but if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them for you.
yes. I know Ann will probably be available afterwards, and like I said, if you have questions for any of us, and that's what this is all about, is to know a little bit about ours and get you even more interested in your own. All right, Larry Corbett, can I have you come forward and you share something on your history?
I'd love to. 9 flying Irishman. Okay. The best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago. We've all heard that. And the second best time is today. Well, the family tree is kind of the same way. And my research started not with the 250th anniversary of America, but with the 200th. So this is my 50th year doing this nonsense, and loving every bit of it. So I came here, Flower Library, all the same places, the county clerk's office. My wife got involved also when starting our tree. I asked my mom to give me everything she had. She filled a little spiral notebook with every relative she could think of and how they were all connected and where they were baptized and just so much stuff. A lot of it was actually true. Some of it wasn't, but that gave me something to learn, and all that microfilm and so forth. But I remember the actual date. I don't remember the actual date. I remember the occasion. I looked up the date. On December 30th, 1976, my father had a retirement dinner as he left the City of Watertown Fire Department with 5 other firefighters, and of course they all invited their families. And Dad's 2 surviving aunts on his father's side, Grandpa's 2 sisters, came to that event. And gosh, when you've got these genealogy bug and you can get somebody, it doesn't matter if it's a dance or out on the street, you start doing those questions. And so Aunt Grace and Aunt Mabel were about a year apart. They were my age now. They were 75 and 74 years old. And I said, I just started doing this, and I want to ask you, as much as you can, tell me about your father. And when he came here from Ireland, I knew he was from Ireland, and who was in his family and what his parents' names were. And Aunt Grace and Aunt Mabel told me a lot, got me started, and as I got going, they told me about their dad. His name was Daniel George Corbett. Daniel was born in Ireland in 1867, and his family came to America when he was about 6 years old. In December of 1874, they sailed the last ship of the year on a ship called the Atlantic. They sailed into New York Harbor before there was an Ellis Island. And Grandma had 5 children at the time. And they told me about that, which I didn't know that he had any brothers or sisters. So he had an older sister, Ellen, and he had sisters Mary Ann and Bridget, and then they had 2 more children when they got to New York. They came to Oswego, New York, originally to live because Grandma, her name was Mary Burke, and her husband's name was John Corbett, and Mary had an uncle and a brother who lived in Oswego. So they came to Oswego, and Grandpa went to school there, and great-grandpa went to school in Oswego, and then he went to work when he was 16 years old at the Kingsford Starch Factory, where he learned the Boilermaker trade. When you're making starch out of corn or potatoes or whatever, you grind it all up, you boil it, and then it goes through a process of drying, which involves hot steam pipes that steam it and dry it out. So he learned the Boilermakers repair and construction business at Kingsford. And on New Year's Day, on April Fool's Day of 1890, he came to Watertown. Well, he came to Watertown to work at the New York Engine Factory, which also made steam boilers for portable engines, which were dragged into the woods as sawmills and so forth. It was a big business from Watertown before there were automobiles. So they did the portable engine work there. He also worked on stationary boilers in businesses, schools, office buildings, people's homes, anybody that had boilers. So he worked for the New York Engine Company became a foreman there. When they went into munitions during the First World War, they closed the steam engine factory, and he started his own boiler works in Watertown. It was called the Watertown Boiler Works, and that building is still existing down on Outer West Main Street, just before the underpass on the left side.
I've always wondered what that building was.
Yep, that was Grandpa's Boiler Works, and he operated that from about 1915 until 1929, when he became ill, passed away. When he came to Watertown, one of the possible reasons is that he met this young lady. That's my great-grandmother. Her name was Josephine Legault. She was a Legault from Oswego County. Her family was French, from French Canada. They came around 1850 to the Oswego area. She was born in the town of Williamstown, and they lived in Williamstown, Redfield, and that vicinity. And he met her either in Watertown or at Oswego, and married her in 1892. So they had 7 children. Here's a photograph of them with their 6 children. This was when Grandpa became a Watertown City Alderman. He ran for election for a 2-year term in 1911, and he became an alderman, and he also became one of the founding members of the Northside Improvement League in Watertown. One of the things I learned from his son, my grandfather, and so forth, was that they didn't have a lot of opportunity in Ireland. You've probably heard those things. When you're a Catholic and you have a country, the Church of Ireland is a Protestant country, they had to tithe that church even though they didn't belong to it. They could not own land. The land was all owned by noblemen from England who owned all the land and rented it out, and their land was in County Limerick at the time, and they were kicked off the land and moved into a village called Scareth, which is in County Clare. And they went into the workhouse. Now this is later. This isn't like Irish famine times, but it's in the early 1870s. And at the time, there was something called the Fenian Rebellion in Ireland. A lot of men were hanged for trying to gain independence from Britain. So they didn't have those opportunities. The opportunities for education were poor, especially when you were a poor family with no land and basically living off what you could grow. And so there was little opportunity for education. You couldn't become a civil servant. You couldn't be a policeman, a fireman, or work for the government as a clerk or anything if you were a Catholic. And So no opportunity there, rebellion going on, and Grandpa's older sister Ellen and he were both born in the workhouse in Ireland. The workhouse separated the men from the women and the children, and all in separate wings of the workhouse, because they didn't want them to get too comfortable or to get to spend family time together. So the children were raised in basically an orphanage type situation, and the men had make work, which didn't provide anything. They went out during the day and they built roads to nowhere. They broke rocks and put the roads down, but they couldn't have a road that went anywhere because that would be taking jobs away from the good English people. So coming to America meant a lot of opportunity for them. And for Daniel, as I said, it meant a good manufacturing job, a business of his own, an opportunity to be involved in civic organizations and work in government. Those were all things that he loved, and he really promoted schools a lot. He spoke before the city council when the Watertown Education Department was part of the city school. They ran the city schools. There wasn't a separate board of education. So these are my two aunts. This is Aunt Grace. Aunt Grace became a civil servant. She worked at the Department of Motor Vehicles. She was a clerk for a judge and so forth in the county office building. This is Aunt Mabel. Aunt Mabel stayed home. She was a valedictorian at Immaculate Heart School, and the family has always treasured education. Grandpa made sure that all of his children finished high school because couldn't do it back in Ireland, and they took full advantage of living in the States. Their children, this went on to their children, their grandchildren. You couldn't serve in the military in Ireland, and Grandpa passed in 29, but Grandma lived until a week after I was born, and she had 9 grandsons who were all in the United States Navy during World War II. So she had a flag with 9 stars on it. They all survived the war. Took advantage again of civil service laws, and a lot of them went to work for the state, or my dad to the city, and uncle on the fire department, another uncle on the police department, another uncle in the post office. We really enjoyed living off the benefits of the state, having a job and giving back to the community. So that's about it. The point of the whole thing is that I asked my aunts, and it was actually the last day that I ever saw either one of them. Aunt Mabel died on the 10th of March, which is, tomorrow's the 10th of March. She died on the 10th of March, 49 years ago. Her sister moved with her daughter to Wisconsin, so I didn't see Aunt Grace again, although she lived for another 15 years. But when I went to Aunt Mabel's funeral, again, it doesn't matter if it's a funeral or a dance. If you've got somebody you want to talk genealogy, that's what you're going to do. So at Aunt Mabel's funeral, I talked to her son Bill, who was really into genealogy, and he had a cousin in California from the Legault family who had researched all the Tangay and the French records, and sent me a big fat book that he had compiled of all those family group sheets from France, and then or from Canada, I mean, and then when Aunt Grace passed away and they brought her back to New York City, I met her daughter, and her daughter typed out everything she could remember about her grandmother. So, because Grandma Jo went to live with her after Grandpa died. So So I would say that my best advice and advice that they've always been giving you is find the oldest person in your family and find out everything they know, and then check it, because a lot of what they told me was legend and nothing else. You know, they said Grandpa came over on a boat that had 6 decks and no bottom. Where did you hear that? Well, that's what my father always told me. You know, I came over on a boat. So, and if you're getting on towards my end of the tree that I planted 50 years ago, pass that information on to young people. I have a network of cousins, first cousins, second cousins, third cousins, and somewhere along the line, in just about every family, there's somebody that comes to me and starts getting the genealogy going, gets their ancestry tests going, and so forth, and I'm able to buy an ancestry test for one once in a while and get going with them on that. And so that's all I have for tonight. Thank you.
All right, well done. Thank you, Larry.
Hope I didn't take too much time.
You are all right, and I want to thank you, everyone is in the room wearing an Irish pin, and thank you, Larry, for bringing those pins. All right, at this time, Janine LeClaire, ask her to come on up.
I'm going to share an obituary that I found interesting, and I hope you do too. It's from my great-grandfather. I will tell you it's not politically correct, some of the language in it, but I'm going to use the language of the time. I'm going to read it as is. Mentions a lake in Canada. I've been unable to locate the lake on a map, but it might be a native name for it, or maybe it was just phonetic and they didn't know how to spell it. I'm not sure. The Jefferson County ties. He had survivors. His children, they were siblings, Christina and William, and they resided in adjacent houses on Thompson Boulevard. And I do remember going there to visit my great aunt Chrissy. And William had a daughter that some of us knew and loved. Her name was Jan Somerville. So she was tied to this family. Okay, this is from the Watertown Daily Times. John Bezette of Harrisville dies. Former village president expires. He was age 67 years. He was long with the Hudson Bay Company. For nearly a quarter of a century, name had been associated with lumbering operations along C&A Railroad. Harrisville, April 19th, 1922. John Bezette, age 67 years, died here yesterday at his home. Mr. Bezette was former president of the village of Harrisville and for many years was an employee of the Hudson Bay Company in various confidential capacities. Born 67 years ago in the Dominion of Canada, Mr. Bezette's early life was spent in the service of the Hudson Bay Company in various confidential capacities. Once each year, he took the 32-day trip by canoe and portage from his remote post on Lake Temiskaming to civilization. The remainder of the year he spent among the Indians, hunting, trading, and trapping. As early as 19 years of age, he had risen to the position of foreman for the company. 2 years later, he was united in marriage with Miss Jean Craig, who survives him. After leaving the service of the Hudson Bay Company, he began his lumbering experience rafting logs down the Ottawa River. In 1898, Mr. Bezette left Canada and came to Harrisville. For nearly a quarter of a century, his name was associated with large lumbering operations along the line of the Carthage and Adirondack Railway. He lumbered for Simon Van Patten. For 15 years, he lumbered for the Aldrich Paper Company. Afterwards, he had large contracts with the National Paper Products Company. With all these, as the head of large forces of men, he served the village as president. During his term of office, he reconstructed a portion of the village streets and erected a water fountain on the east end of the village. Mr. Bezette was a well-known forester. He was a member of Diana Lodge number 928 F and AM, and was also affiliated with the Carthage chapter number 259 RAM. Besides his widow, Mr. Bezette is survived by 8 children. One child, a daughter Blanche, died a few years ago. His eldest daughter Elizabeth married William Deachman and resides at North Woodstock, New Hampshire. A second daughter, Mary, married Robert Manigan, supervisor of the town of Diana, and resides in Harrisville. The youngest daughter, Christina, lives with her mother and teaches in the Harrisville school. 4 of Mr. Bazette's sons, Ross, George, John, and Lloyd, live in Harrisville and are connected with its business and industries. His youngest son, Captain William Bazette, resides in Watertown and is connected with the office of the state engineer. The funeral will be held from his late home in this village at 2 o'clock on Thursday. The Reverend W.K. Bradshaw will officiate, and the Masonic fraternity will have charge in full form. That's making a great day, Father.
Thank you. So researching old newspapers, vital for genealogy. And you can find some really nice ones. All right, Carrie Johnson, I invite you to come forward.
Well, to start with, if I talk too long, I promise you an intermission, we'll order pizza. This, by the way, is a genealogy book of my family that is actually not complete. I'm finding out now. I didn't do anything for a long time, just recently have I ever done anything. But this is a book my brother put together, and it takes, he gave it to me in 2006. And it's all our ancestors, but I'm finding other ancestors that were in the same period of time. That I don't know how he missed them, but maybe he just didn't like them, I don't know. But anyways, I had thought about who I was gonna talk about today. And I found a while ago when I was up here doing some research with my mother, my wife, excuse me, my mother, yeah. my mother would be like 100 and something. Where do I go? But anyways, I found out that I was related to a guy by the name of Robert Trent Payne. Okay, I'm sure you all know him. He was a signer of the Declaration of Independence. He was also the Attorney General for the state of Massachusetts, and he was the one, he tried the Tea Party guys.
Oh.
And his opponent was John Adams, who won. But anyways, in that genealogy work, I decided, I says, you know, everybody probably knows about him, that's kind of a boring thing. I mean, anybody can look up Declaration of Independence, find out who signed it. So I went deeper, a little deeper, looking for people like John Dillinger, Bonnie and Clyde. Something spicy, something to get some people going, and I never come up with something. So I got way back into the 1500s, and I found this guy, I'm gonna butcher his name, Johannes Theodorus Polemus. Okay, I don't know if any of you are related to this guy or not, but I found. Oh, by the way, I grew up Irish, French, Scotch, and Dutch. Okay, until I took a DNA test. My mother was 100% Irish. My father was the rest. Okay, but took a DNA test. No Irish, no French, no Scotch. And I don't know if I found any Dutch, really. But this guy gets me close. Because he is German, which I'm not supposed to be, and Swiss, they think. Anyways. So I went and did a little research on him, and you'll be happy with this. I pulled up two good sources. The Guide to the Polemus Family Papers, published in the New Jersey Historical Society, and an article published in the New York Genealogy and Biological Records in April 1959. And I have a copy of that with me if anybody wants to see it. So who was this guy? Are you ready for this? He was my grandfather. the 11th one. My 11th grandfather. He was born in 1598 in Bavaria, Germany, basically Germany. He lived a busy life and he died in Flatbush, Brooklyn, New York. He was a pastor, to the Dutch Reformed Church. And they sent him off to Netherlands, which he didn't do very good. And they kicked him out of there, basically. And then he got a job was hired with a Dutch West Indies company. And they sent him to Brazil to preach to the Dutch settlers that were in Brazil. And he also learned to speak French and German, and he taught in those things. He taught in those languages too. But then when he's in his 50s, there was an uprising in Brazil. Portuguese chased all the Dutch out of there. They went out and done 16 ships. Okay, 16 ships, and they put his wife and family on one ship, and he ended up on another one. Now, why that happened, I don't know. It doesn't say. Okay, but then, of the 16 ships heading for Holland, 15 made it. His ship didn't. He got pirated by the Spanish, and he got hauled around. He bounced around different places, and he ended up in a place called New Netherlands, which now is New York City. Okay, and he went on, continued to be a preacher, and he went on, and it took him about 2 years to get his wife from Holland to New York. He had to get the Dutch West Indies Company to give him some back pay that they owed him, so he could get her on a boat and get her over here. Okay, but then he ended up having 8 children, and he became the first Baptist Dutch Reformed Church minister in Long Island. And he was a popular guy, a community member. He did a lot of work. He was so popular that Peter Stuyvesant, who was the governor at the time, deeded him 450 acres of Flatbush, Brooklyn, New York.
Oh, wow.
I would not be here if I could prove that I was his relative. Because I could pay for the retirement of everybody in this room at that time. He had 8 children. And then his family migrated to New Jersey. This will interest you, Ann, and specifically Newark. And they were a very prominent family there. Matter of fact, one of the most prestigious ones. All his kids all went to prestigious colleges like Rutgers and Columbia and Wesleyan and Williams. Quite a few of them all did. He had a son that became a preacher, the same Dutch Reformed Church, which I have still haven't heard from today. Another one of his sons joined the New York Produce Exchange and became a very successful wool merchant. And then his son's daughter, which would be his granddaughter, was Elaine Ogden Polemus. She married a guy by the name of Frost. Her last name was Frost. And he sent her to all the fine ladies' schools of the time, and she'd become basically what we would call today a socialite. And then finally she became a member of the National Society of the Colonial Dames of America, which is pretty prestigious. That's right down your line. And then their house became is a historical landmark in Newark, and it's now just fit. It was made a gallery by the New Jersey Genealogy Society. That owns it now. And so I have the whole story here if you want to hear it, but that's my great Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gary. And one thing that, I can highlight in his story brings it home. You not only learn about family history,
He left his cane.
you learn a lot about history.
Oh, I learned to walk.
There you go. You're doing a great job learning to walk. All right, but yes, you have an opportunity to learn about history because why did certain people migrate from one point to another? So, all right. Next up, we got Donna Trumbull. And I'd like to thank everyone that's sharing some comments tonight. Thank you.
First of all, I want to tell you how I got interested in family history. I'm a Woodruff, and so we would have a Woodruff reunion every summer. And I can remember going up to the pavilion up at the Thompson Park in specific. And what my aunties would do was we'd get a big table out and they would spread out the family genealogy. Take up the whole picnic table. I can remember as a little girl doing this, standing on my tiptoes, trying to find out while all my cousins were off playing, doing whatever. That was my interest. I probably was 5 or 6 years old, looking to see what the heck is this. So I've always had a big interest in family history. So I, in 1972, became interested in really doing research. And so I knew that my cousin, I don't know how many of you might remember, her name was Catherine Martin, and she was very, very big into the Historical Society and family history and everything. So I figured that she probably would be the first place to go. She was my mother's first cousin. So she said, yeah, sure, come on over this and such a night. She was a school teacher. She taught at General Brown. We'll get all the genealogy out and I'll show you. So she did. She spread it all out on the table. And me with my little pencil, writing like crazy down, because back then we didn't have digital cameras. We didn't have any way to do all the research that we have now, which is just, it still boggles my mind, the things that we can do with one press of a button that took me years and years to do and get research. But one of the lines that Tom asked for me to speak about one person, but I'm gonna kind of tell you about one line that I have, which I feel like you guys might find interesting, and that is my Delano line, which goes up through and ends up with Richard Warren. Do any of you know who he is?
Yes.
Do you know who Richard Warren is?
The author?
No.
No.
He was the ship's doctor on the Mayflower.
Oh, wow.
So
Okay then.
he came over on the Mayflower. He had 8 children, and I always thought until just recently that his family would have traveled with him coming over, but no, they did not. And he actually has the most descendants that can trace back. He's the one that most people will find are related to at this point in time. So he had all these children, but they actually came over on the ship the following year. There was a lot of ships that followed the Mayflower over. His children, most of them came over on the ship called Anne. But the other one that I want to tell you about is my grandfather, who was a prince. His name was Philippe Dulannoy. And he lived in France, but somehow ended up over where the Pilgrims were in Everland when they were having the campment there before they shipped out. They kept going back and forth from England to Netherlands and everything before they could get enough money and get the boat and everything to come over to America. He fell in love with one of the girls there and followed on the ship called the Fortune the following year. So if you're related usually to one member of, and my grandfather Richard signed the Mayflower Compact, which is, I think, pretty interesting how they were so determined to have the America that we have now with rights and everything. And that has always followed down through my family. Every time I go up that line, I see how having faith, having hard work principles came all the way down through that line to my grandparents. You know, they were very, very industrious, very willing to take chances. It was really brave of them to get on this boat, and we all know about how much they suffered and how the next year they were hungry and worked really hard to be able, if you think about all the things that our ancestors have gone through, for us to have what we have today is just a miracle to me. So it's a wonderful thing to honor them, to find about your history. I have so many of Richard Warren's children ended up fighting in the Revolutionary War, and then again in the War of 1812, because they felt that that right to have the freedom of agency was so important that they were willing to send off their children and everything to fight to preserve that. That's your message for me.
Thank you. And I saw, Donna had a sheet of paper, and I just assumed that was her notes, and then I see at the end, it's our program. So she was talking all that right off the top of her head, and that's, when you're really into genealogy, you can tell that story.
I could go on about so many, it was hard for me to pick one.
Right. Okay, I am going to invite Greg Plants up. He'll be our last one. I know I said I was going to open it up to the audience, but I am watching the clock, and I know we all have schedules. This isn't the only thing going on in our lives, but I am going to invite Greg up, and he'll be our concluding speaker.
I have 2 minutes.
You can take 5. He has 5.
I coached a lot of years, so I'm gonna follow the KISS rule, which I always told my kids was keep it simple, stupid. So I'm gonna stay in the 20th century, and I got started, Tammy and I began after in the late 90s. I had no one in my family I don't think had been terribly interested. I wasn't smart enough, only but a couple of times in my life, to ask my grandfathers questions and things. So I discovered that I've really been intrigued with secrets that families held and never told you about. And thankfully, because of a historical newspaper, the Northern New York Historical Newspaper, I've discovered secrets that made sense as a kid growing up. One of them was my maternal grandmother was a very stoical lady, and she was very, very prim and proper. And I never really thought too much about why I never saw alcohol in her house. And even when I was student teaching, I stayed with them while I was student teaching, and no alcohol at all. Now, I was a college student, so I'd go out on the weekend after a ball game, and probably I would come back and probably had a couple more than I should have. But I also discovered my grandparents, when they retired in 1970, they'd always worked away. They worked at the children's home here in outer Sandy Creek, and then they worked at a place called the George Junior Republic, which is down in Freeville, the other side of Cortland. So they were only home 3 or 4 weeks a year. And my grandfather liked to do handicrafts. In fact, his avocation was he made these little plaques, and he'd go around in his vacations in the summer and he'd sell them to the resorts or the lakes around Theresa. So I'd go out and help Grant, and I'd always find bottles of brandy that he would have hidden. They were never in the house, never. I don't think I ever saw him take a drink in the house, and I don't think he drank terribly while he was working with it, but the stuff was there. So when I became aware of the Northern New York Historical Newspaper, I obviously, as many of us have, sat there, and I started. My grandmother's maiden name was Lonky, and they were French, Lampierre, anglicized it to Lonky. They lived on the Plum Brook Road up in Norwood, Norfolk area. And I came across an article I think my great-grandfather's first name was Bill Lonke, was involved in a fatal accident. And even though they were French, they suffered from the Irish, the curse. They imbibed more than they should have. He was involved in an accident that there was a death. And my mother had passed when I discovered that. I had one remaining uncle who was out here at Samaritan and rather Ives Hill. So he did time, my great-grandfather did time in Dannemora for that. So I went into my uncle, he had passed a couple months after that. I said, Uncle Cliff, did you realize that your grandfather did time in Dannemora? And my classic uncle went, no, wouldn't have happened, no. So I had to pull the article out, and he said, really? That kind of makes sense. And my grandmother had a brother Douglas and a brother Don. Don, as a kid, I knew him. He was crippled in a car accident involving alcohol. Douglas was married, and I think it was his third youngest. The wife died in childbirth. So my great-grandmother raised the three kids, and her husband had passed. I think he may have died from some sort of alcohol situation. Douglas, I think, just couldn't handle the grief. So the article I found on him is that he died in a car accident. They believe that he found the culvert, and I'm sure he had been drinking and just couldn't handle it. So that was a dirty secret. Nobody ever talked about in my family. And then another one that involves the other side of the family, and I'll be very quick on this one, is my dad was born in 1923 in Rochester, and he was raised in Alex Bay. And Dad didn't know an awful lot about, he knew somewhat about how he ended up here. In the 50s, and I'm 8, 9 years old, we go to Rochester and we meet an Aunt Lillian that Dad discovered as an Aunt Lillian. So we visit with her, and she was a sister of Dad's father, who we never knew. When Dad's mother died in 1924, Dad's 13 months old, thereabout. Dad was born in July. And he had an older sister born in 14 or 15, Betty. She's 9 years old. No husband. Lillian's brother's name is Thomas, and I'm a Thomas Gregory, and Dad was Tom. So we go down, and Aunt Lillian, she says, looks at me and says, "Oh, you look like your grandfather," and so on and so forth. So Dad kind of searched around. He found that he was born in the Catholic Church, and they found the Catholic registrar that he was born not of Plants. My last name was Plants. His name was Thomas Joseph Smith, who was the father, Smyth. Dad and Betty, when the mother died, Dad's 13 months old, Betty's 9, the maternal grandmother and maternal uncle from Alex Bay go to Rochester, and I don't know why, but Thomas isn't around. So the one aunt, there were two, Lillian and a sister, wanted to take Dad, but not the sister, because she had lost a son. She wanted someone for the name, which is a part I was told later. So Dad, and they weren't going to separate the kids, so they brought the two kids back. Grandma raised Betty. The uncle, who was a Plants, raised my father. Dad is a Smith. So this is 1924. Dad's raised, and and goes through World War II, and he becomes interested in the family. And I always wondered, why didn't he know anything about his father? So Dad had no idea about where his mother was, or where she had been buried, or any of that. So Tammy and I became involved in the late 90s, as I said. So we kind of start looking around and wondered, we discovered, and I ran into a cousin from Canandaigua who was in fact, when I meet Peg now, whenever I meet her, I'll say, "Whoa, Margaret, who once and no longer is a cousin." I thought she was like a second cousin. And remember, it was her grandmother that said I looked like the father. So anyhow, we go to Ireland, and we meet all of the Smiths over there in Roscommon, and we discover, you know, Eileen and another sister came over 1903, 1904. Thomas, the father, he comes over at the age of 17 in 1903, and they lived with Uncle Nicholas Devereaux, who was a fruit salesman in Rochester, you know, along the streets and all that sort of stuff. So I said, boy, that's intriguing. I'd like to know more about my Irish, the Irish, that family. So a few years ago, I decided to take a Y-DNA test, and which it trails the male line, so I ought to be able to find out. So I have Peg and all her family that are on my tree, and I'm getting all of these hits that Peg's not related to me. We're not even, we're totally not related at all, because it would have been through the father. But I'm getting connections in Boston. And I'm thinking, so I sent out a few emails, and most of them didn't want to talk to me. They thought I was scamming them. And so I just kind of let it die. And about 4 or 5 years ago, I got a call from a lady in the Boston area, and she said, my ex and my son find that you're a close match. Would you mind if we kind of find out how we're related? I said, I'd love to do it. She worked with a police agency in the Boston area, and she said, I'm going to use the same technique that lady from NBC did, the blind lady, and she did. So I gave her what I knew, and about 4 weeks later, we're at the cottage down at the lake, and I get a call from her, and she said, I got it. And I said, really? She said, yep, and she shared everything. It probably doesn't speak well of the grandmother, but she showed me in the mid-20s, the early 20s during Prohibition, a fellow by the name of Conley worked with Thomas Smith. They were bartenders, and I know they worked together because they were both arrested for selling, booze when they shouldn't have. And so, long story short, we assume, and then I just got some connections the other day from my ancestors, all kinds of Conleys from Galway. I'm Irish as much as I was before, but there is no connection to the Smiths that we thought. So, I'm very, and I got another family member. I love the secrets, the dirt, and I'm trying to figure out what's going on with that. But anyhow, those are the ones that I found interesting. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. That was very interesting. Now, I have a great uncle. In 1918, he went to Dannemora. He was there for 6 years. So they may have known your relative. Everything is relative. All right, so we're going to go ahead and close up the presentation. Before we do, I will say that next month, on April 13th, I am going to be leading the program on Genealogy Bank. And we're Genealogy Bank. It's an online newspaper. It's good for all across the nation. But all of the Watertown Daily Times articles going way back to 1890 and up to today are on there. So if you have ancestors in Jefferson County and you're researching them, Genealogy Bank is a very nice program. It is a subscription based, but I will tell you that for my $100 a year, I probably have already pulled down about 500 articles of obituaries, marriages, you name it. So it's paid for itself many times over. Again, thank you, Patty LaShawn, for taping tonight and making this program available, and I wish everyone a good night. Thank you.